Hi. Hello, hello, good afternoon. Thank you to everybody who's joining us. Sorry about that. Have someone having a little trouble getting in here. Um, Thank you for everybody who's starting to log in. Oh, I see a few people from this morning. Hello again. Hi, Leonard. Yeah, I see a few people who joined us this morning. Thank you for spending your whole day with us. These are crazy days. Quick turnaround, right? Hi, Sonia. So just to let everybody know, I could see everybody. Carl's here. Hi, Carl. Carl, I see your hands raised. I unmuted you, so you could unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, how are
Good.
you?
How you doing?
Good, 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 good. Did you have a question or were you waving to me?
Just waving to you.
Hi, I'm waving back. It's so nice to see you. I'm glad you're doing well. I was really happy when I got the email from you the other day because then I know that you were doing pretty good. So it's good to see you, Carl.
Thanks, Patty.
Enjoy the course. Yeah. Okay. Someone just wrote in the chat box, hi, and you're coming up as anonymous. Someone just wrote hi, and you're coming up as anonymous. Can you just send me in the chat box, can you tell me who you are? Because I don't see anybody coming in as a phone call and your name's not showing up. I just want to make sure I'm able to do your attendance. Whoever just wrote hi in the chat box at 102. Hi, everybody. Hi. Yes, Sharon. Hello, can you see me? Sandy, I could see you. I could see everybody. I see everybody. Hi, girlfriend. Marie Somwell. Thank you. Okay, I have a few hands up. Priscilla, I've unmuted you. You could unmute yourself if you have a question. Are you waving? Is everybody waving? Okay. Priscilla's waving. Hello. Hi. Elmer, hi. It's good to see you again. So I do have a box here. I could see everybody as you're logging in. I see everybody that's here. No worries. I cannot see your face. I cannot see your face. I don't have your picture up on the screen, which isn't that nice when we do the early morning ones? We could just stay in well, you could stay in your pajamas. I just throw on a blouse. I'm still in my pajama bottoms. Oh, Gina, I'm so sorry you're not feeling well. You're doing fine. So you found the chat box, so you're doing well. So if you have questions, just whatever function that you used, then go ahead and continue to use that. And I hope you feel better soon. Sorry, I'm late. No worries. We wouldn't start without you, Daniel. Okay, good. All right. That's a good idea. That's a good idea, Brianna. Oh, isn't that nice? Barry, that's so nice. Barry saying hi to everybody. That's so nice. You guys are so, I'm telling you, I just love you guys. I love doing these courses. Can you see me or does it show my name? I cannot see your face. But I can see your name. Santiago. Love that name. All right. So thank you everybody for being here. Oh, good. You did make it back. I see you now. You're back. Excellent. All right, so this is great. This is great. We have a lot of people hopping in still. Um, Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm really excited about this course. This course, what you need to know about mold is the perfect title for this course, because this course does provide you with absolutely everything you need to know about mold. This course is it's the amount of information contained within this course material is absolutely remarkable. It's fabulous. I promise you, you're going to love every second of this. Um, it's really an exceptional course. And it's really important that everybody has an opportunity to take this course. So I welcome you here with us today, and I'm glad that you're here with us, especially everybody that was with us with our 3-hour course this morning. Thank you so much for coming back. I mean, it's really a long day. So I really appreciate you coming back and spending the afternoon with us as well. For those of you who are new, I do see a few new names here on here. So I just want to give you a little idea of who we are and why we do these courses. Well, first of all, I did have, is he on here right now? He was here this morning. Is Phil on here? No, I don't see Phil, but Phil was on this morning. I actually had an agent, a really nice guy, Phil from Philadelphia, sent me an email after he took a course with us for the first time last week and said, I just don't understand how you do these for free. It's very selfish of us to do these for free, because what you have to understand is we enjoy working with you, especially after you've taken some of our courses and you're up to date with all the newest information, and it just makes communication with you so much easier. We love working with your clients. After we teach you how to prepare your client for the inspection, then we know that your clients are prepared, and it makes it just, and we enjoy them. We absolutely enjoy them. Pete and I used to travel to different agencies in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, and bring these courses live. We used to have a ball hanging out with the agents on their teams, the whole teams, and everybody had a great time because they all worked together and we would have fun. A lot of learning, but a lot of laughs. So it was really, we look forward to being able to come back out and do them again. But until that time, we're just very grateful to be able to bring them to you virtually. As you know, when you log in, Zoom will create a timestamp of the time that you entered the session. And then when you leave, it'll create that other timestamp when you leave the session. And then that information is automatically pulled into my system, which is integrated with Zoom. And those timestamps are submitted with your credits. If you're having connectivity issues, let me know so that I could document it and look into it to make sure that you receive your credits. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we're Pete and Patty. We're from Real Estate Inspections. We're the largest privately owned home inspection firm in the region. We cover all of southeastern Pennsylvania, southern and central New Jersey. We are in northeastern Maryland and most of Delaware as well. Not only are we the largest, we're also the highest rated. We're so proud of our over 1,000 5-star reviews across all platforms of social media. We're on Google, Yelp, Angie's List, Home Advisor. That's driven by not only our exceptional customer service, the fabulous support team that's behind the scenes supporting the inspectors so the inspectors could focus on you and your client. Our inspectors, their experience, their knowledge, the technology, but it's also driven by the fact that we're so convenient. We're one-stop shopping. We do everything: commercial, residential, radon, termite. We do new construction progress inspections. We call them progress inspections because we come in different phases. We come in for the foundation. We come in for the pre-drywall. We get to see all the rough-ins that have been installed before the insulation and the drywall go up. And then, of course, the final walkthrough. We also do air quality testing. Wait, just hold on to your hat. We're really going to dive into that deeply today. Air quality testing for a biological substance consistent with mold. You're going to love that term by the end of the day. You're also, oh, I just see Pete popped in. There was like this phantom screen changer for a minute there. It was a little weird. So you are just going to learn a ton of information. So yes, not only do we provide you with the information, but when our inspectors are there performing the inspection, they could also perform air quality testing for mold. And you'll see that, yes, we can do that. You're just going to be, you're not going to be a mold expert. You will not be a biologist by the end of the course, but pretty darn close. All of our inspectors are also EPA lead safe certified inspectors. That means we have that EPA certification. As you know, the city of Philadelphia had changed the law regarding lead safety back in October, so we can perform those inspections as well. Of course, our stucco inspections, we perform more stucco inspections than anyone. Um, we perform thousands of stucco inspections. Pete has performed thousands up and down the coast to the point where he's actually developed a very unique two-step process. We perform a level one, which is non-invasive. We do a visual and rely on technologies such as interior thermal imaging and moisture scanning. And then if it's necessary, then we'll escalate to the level two, which is the probing and moisture mapping. Um, and then, of course, our sewer line video inspections. As you know, a lot of townships and boroughs require that inspection service as part of the real estate transaction. So we can perform those sewer lateral video inspections during the home inspection. And as more and more municipalities are jumping on this bandwagon, we decided to make your life a little bit easier. So we made a couple bundle packages because we know a lot of agents like to call and schedule the inspections for the clients to make sure everything's perfect, nothing's missing. You don't want to end up, the day before and be, hey, where's the radon? So we know that you do like to schedule them for your clients. So we created the essentials, which is your typical home radon termite. But then we also have an intrusion detection package, which includes that sewer lateral video inspection. It also includes a combustible gas leak detection inspection, as well as interior thermal imaging for moisture intrusion. It's interior thermal imaging. It's not X-ray vision, but the anomalies that appear show us temperature differentials, and it really gives us a lot of information. It's really an excellent home inspection service to utilize. And then we took it one step further with these packages, and we created the maximum awareness package. Call that one "What's Lurking Behind the Walls." Kind of scary. That is everything in the intrusion detection package, including that air quality testing for a mold concentration. Oh, I changed it up. And it didn't feel natural. We get so excited over this mold course. You will soon see in the next couple minutes that Pete is a huge fan of mold. And I just love saying the term for a biological substance consistent with mold. So, but why do we do all these things? We do the courses, we did the packages, we do all these things for you because we're out there in the field with you and we appreciate you. We see the job that you do, the devotion that you have, the hours that you put in. And another little way of saying that we really appreciate you is our agent appreciation program. And we do this weekly. If a client calls and schedules an inspection and mentions that we happen to be on your list of providers, then I put your name in a hat. And once a week, I will pull a name out of the hat and call that agent and say, surprise. And the lucky agent gets to pick from any of these really cool, neat devices, these techie devices that I just love. They're really a lot of fun. Pete always highlights the dual dash cam first. I think he's mocking me. So, but yeah, we have, those earbuds are really a lot of fun. I talked to an agent just recently who she actually won the AirPod. She chose the AirPods when she won the weekly drawing, and then when she called me, she's like, "Talking to you on my AirPods," and I was a little tempted to start singing, but I didn't. Um, so, and then just to make it a little more fun, we decided to do, we've been doing this year-end grand prize drawing, all the names that I've gathered throughout the whole year, put them in one big hat and draw one lucky winner for this 75-inch HD smart TV. The TV is absolutely amazing. I don't want to get like all Vanna White on you, but it really is a lot of fun to do this drawing at the end of the year, and the TV is really remarkable. So I mentioned this guy, Pete. Who is Pete? Pete is a guy who has great taste in art. Um, he is the owner of our firm. He is our chief inspector. He is one of our founding fathers. He's the guy who loves educating you as well as everybody on the team. He's constantly out there with our inspectors. training them, going over new things with them, making sure that they always have the latest and greatest as far as technology. So a lot of people, after they take the course, they would want an inspection and they say, but I want Pete. It's okay. All of our inspectors inspect like Pete, analyze like Pete, report like Pete. It's okay. All of our inspectors are exactly like Pete. So, because as you will see shortly, Pete loves sharing all his knowledge and information. I'm going to let you guys get started. I'll hop back in at the end to give you information on how to expect to receive your certificate of completion and your credits, and maybe give you a clue as to what are some of the fun courses that I have coming up later this week and next week. Pete, have a wonderful time.
Thanks, Patty. And thanks everybody for being here this afternoon. Beautiful afternoon. Just scarfed down some lunch in between classes. Hope you guys had a chance to do the same. If you were with us this morning, maybe you're still enjoying your lunch. That's perfectly fine as well. So this is a Zoom webinar. So if you haven't figured it out already, a little bit different than Zoom meetings. If you're familiar with the Zoom meetings, you see everybody's face on there. Doesn't matter how many people are in the room, in the class. Zoom webinars a little bit different, and that is that Zoom set these up so we can focus on the content on the screen. So we don't have all our faces up there. So everybody's video is turned off. We do have the ability to turn your audio on so that you can speak. But if you have any questions or any comments, observations, or stories, feel free to put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, in the chat box. I have visibility to both of those, and I will answer your questions, respond to your comments in the flow of the class. If you do have a question that requires a little bit more unpacking, development, or you say, hey, I just don't feel like typing, go ahead and raise your hand. If you raise your hand, hit that raise hand button, I'm going to assume you want me to enable you to talk. I'm happy to do that in the flow of the class. Just want to make sure you go into your audio settings and make sure that you unmute yourself. If you are muted and you start talking, we're not going to be able to hear you, and that's going to be a little awkward. So just want to make sure that we can hear what you have to say. And so, guys, we love it when you guys are interactive with these courses, with these classes. This particular class, we're learning about mold. There's a lot here, so please don't hesitate to stop me, ask questions. We'll answer your questions in the flow of the class, and looking forward to having a great time with you here today. So we're here to talk about mold. And so what's the deal with mold, as Jerry Seinfeld might start one of his stand-up routines with. So we're going to talk about what you need to know about mold, particularly with regards to the real estate transaction that we are involved with. So a lot of people, mold, don't like mold. Stucco's the S word when it comes to real estate. Mold, is there an M word? I don't know, but people don't like mold. Buyers see it, they get afraid of it. Myself, like Patty said, she kind of hinted that, art, I look at this and I say, wow, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I look at these pictures of mold, looking at it under a microscope. I see the biodiversity, the color, the size, the structure, it's just incredible. And so, I appreciate mold. I really, really do enjoy looking at it in all its shapes, sizes, and forms. What we're going to do next, pop this little couple-minute video in here for you, just so that you can see mold, different types of molds, hopefully to give you an appreciation of mold as I have an appreciation for mold. A lot of this is time-lapse, so it's really cool. Just take a minute here, watch this, and we'll see mold as it kind of develops. It's pretty cool. So it's only a couple minutes, but it is fascinating to watch. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but I could watch that stuff all day. Yes, so it looks like Swan Lake, a la mode. Yeah, so fascinated by it. Some people think I'm weird. That's all right. I've been dealing with that my whole life. I'm perfectly okay with that. So mold, watching that video, looking at pictures of mold, going back to these, first pictures that I showed you, Beauty in the Eyes of the Beholder. I would take some of those pictures, put a framework, put them in my living room if my wife would let me. I've asked her, she said no. I still might put some here up in my office. Uh, Incredible, beautiful. The biodiversity, I'm just blown away by it. But mold in a house, particularly if we're trying to navigate through a real estate transaction, not so pretty, right? We don't like this. I wouldn't want to sit here and watch hours of this. So, how do we navigate this? How do we go about dealing with this? This is what we're going to talk about here today. So, what we're going to learn, we're going to talk about the definition of mold, what mold is, where does it come from, what's the deal with mold, and what are the dangers associated with it. Most people don't know much about mold at all, except they don't want to eat a moldy piece of bread, and they certainly don't want to see anything that they think is mold growing in their living space. So why? Well, they know that there's problems associated with this, particularly health issues. And so we're going to talk about that as well. We're going to talk about where mold can show up, how to spot it. We're going to talk about the process of testing for mold. We're going to talk about mold remediation, what's involved with that. There's different types. Some of it can be extremely expensive. Some of it's not really expensive at all. It's really very, very just basic cleaning. So we're going to talk about mold's impact on the real estate transaction. And so that's how we're going to navigate this course today. So what is mold? Well, mold's a fungus that grows in the form of a multicellular filament called hyphae. If you look at this, you can see it kind of looks, I put this little picture of the broccolini in you. This isn't mold, this is broccolini. You might have this for dinner. This over here, this is mold under a microscope actually, and you can kind of see that it kind of looks similar. We have the stalk, and the stalks come up to these little florets, and we have these little florets, the flower, whatever you want to call them, on top of the structure here. And on these florets, there's these little tiny dots, and these are actually the spores. The spores are what's going to be released into the air, and you can see all around here that we've got some spores that are floating in the air around here. So, pretty basic structure. It's pretty cool. I think it's fascinating to look at it and see the similarities in nature when it comes to looking at say a piece of broccoli and then looking at a mold structure and seeing that there's some similarities here. It's pretty incredible, right? So some fascinating facts about mold. Well, mold's a subgroup of the fungi kingdom. I don't know if anybody had mushrooms on their salad at lunchtime, but if you did, well, it was probably delicious, right? I love mushrooms. I love all kinds of mushrooms. And so, but they are, in the same, mold is in the same subgroup as mushrooms in the fungi kingdom. And so another interesting fact to know is that mold is asexual. So what's that mean? Well, you don't need a male and a female. Mold is self-reproducing. Mold does a couple things very well. It eats and it reproduces. Mold doesn't need a whole lot to exist. It just needs a climate in which to thrive. It likes a certain temperature. And by the way, there's different types of molds. So there's molds that do really, really well in wet spaces. There's molds that do really, really well in dry spaces, arid climates. Mold can grow in the desert. Mold can grow in the forest, right? So mold can grow pretty much anywhere, depending on the type of mold that it is. And so mold's present everywhere. So lunch break went out, I let the dogs out, I walked back onto the deck, took a nice deep breath, saw how beautiful it was outside, and then I walked back inside. Guess what? When I came back inside, guess what I just did? I just released a bunch of mold spores. If you did the same, go ahead and shake your shirt. Even if you didn't, if you've been outside it all day, or if you've just been sitting there, when you shake your shirt, you're releasing particles into the air. And I just did that. And some of those particles were mold spores. I just breathed in mold spores and I exhaled mold spores. It's in the air that we breathe. It's everywhere. It's on the carpet. It's on the clothes. I just made myself a grilled cheese. That's what I had for lunch. And when I ate my grilled cheese, there were some mold spores on it. It's always with us. That's the first thing to understand. It's always here. It was here before we were here, and it's going to be here while we live here. And so it's everywhere. There's asthma, people that have, interesting fact, there's about 20 million people in the country that suffer from asthma, 21 million people, and many of those have asthma as a result of being exposed to mold. Generally, mold in and of itself isn't going to kill you. Some people are terrified when they see certain kinds of molds, but people don't generally die of mold. They can die of being exposed to high concentrations of mold and then having mold related sickness after the fact. Not a lot of people die from being exposed to mold, but mold can make your life pretty uncomfortable. We'll talk about more about the health impacts, but primarily, we can get mold related sicknesses which impact the immune system. And if you've already got a compromised immune system, you can start to have a cascade effect, and it can have an impact on you, which ultimately can, in some instances, lead to death. So mold's directly related to some diseases. We'll talk about those as well. Mold produces spores that are extremely small. I mean, just like I said, just breathe in some more, exhaled some more back out. We can't see them, but they're there. They're going right now. They're going by by the camera as I speak. The door's open right now outside. There's an exchange of air from inside outside. Mold spores are coming into my house. Mold spores are in everybody's house, but we just don't see them. How small might you ask they are? Let's look at this relative size scale. So if we look at this, and we can see first, we've got like this picture, this picture here, that if I continue this big blue bubble, this is all blue in here. This is a water droplet. And when I talk about it, it's a rain droplet of water. So I'm not talking about a raindrop. You can hold your hand out and a raindrop comes in your hand, all different sizes of raindrops. I'm not talking about a raindrop. This is a rain droplet. If you've ever been outside on a foggy morning and it almost looks like you can see the mist going through the air, those little tiny droplets of water that are visible to the eye. You can't pick out one of them, but you can kind of see it looks kind of misty out here. Each one of those little rain droplets is what this is, to give you an idea of size. It's very, very small, barely visible to the eye. If one of them went past, you wouldn't even see it. So next to that, we have the plant spore, this big green ball, and we can't see those. Those are in the air right now as you go by. There's plant spores in the air. Can't see them, visible to the eye. They're that small. Then if you look at the next one, we have the fungus spores. Now this is just a general size. So this is what we have in terms of, a mold spore. This orangish, red. I'm not sure what color this is, but give you an idea of how the size of a mold spore. Now, keep in mind, different types of molds are going to have different sizes, but in general, this is about the size of a mold spore. So you can see extremely small, followed by this fuchsia colored ball, which is the size of some bacteria that gets airborne bacteria. And then we have next to that a little blue ball, which is really hard to see. That's tobacco smoke, very, very, very small. And then look at the little red dot there next to that. That's your virus. And so think about that in terms of, we're going through, COVID, spent the last year trying to avoid this particular virus. And so you can see how small this is. Right. Sorry, he's got something to say here. So, virus really, really small. So think about that, when you have your non-braided masks on, and just goes through those masks. Yeah, it'll slow down the velocity with which it happens. But that stuff is so small, it's unbelievable. That's why it's so important. Just heard again that the CDC this morning reiterating how important it is to keep the hands washed, keep ourselves clean. And, that's really the best protection that we have against the viruses. But we're not here to talk about viruses. We're here to talk about not bacteria even. We're here to talk about mold spores. And so mold, and how it impacts us, and how do we deal with that, so particularly, when we're dealing with transactions. So what are the mold regulations? So if this were the radon class, we'd be talking about a threshold limit value. Everybody knows it. You can probably repeat it. 4 picocuries per liter is the action level at which we recommend mitigation for radon. So radon being an inert element, an inert gas, which is an element that comes from the ground. and it is, just a naturally occurring element in nature. And so mold's naturally occurring as well. But the thing with radon is it has an atomic structure that's very consistent. It's one of the elements on the periodic chart of elements. And so when we have it, sorry about that, because oh, sorry about that. So had that speaker off. Remember, I said we got to unmute ourselves, right? So, and I see somebody was raising their hand to tell me. So thank you guys. So, um, getting back to what I was saying. So when we have radon, we know that the EPA says 4 picocuries per liter, we need to take action. That's the limit value. Radon, an inert gas, comes out of it's got a specific atomic structure. It's very, very consistent. So what's the deal with mold? How do we determine at what level do we take action with mold? Well, there is no level when it comes to mold. Mold is so diverse. As Hal pointed out, it's even on the outside of the International Space Station. It can thrive in all these different environments. Mold, there's so many there's tens of thousands of different types and different variations of mold. Unlike radon, which is the same atomic structure every single time, other different things that we deal with, lead, things like that. We know that if there's certain, like for instance, blood or lead getting into our blood, if we get lead contamination, we know that at a certain blood lead level that it's considered a public health concern. Mold, no. So when I taught this class 2 months ago, it was in the middle of February, and it was like 15 degrees outside. And so when I taught that class then, if we'd have gone outside and measured the amount of mold concentration outside the middle of February, I would be coming back with numbers, say, in the range of, I don't know, 150 total spores per cubic meter. If we took almost a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, it's a little bit bigger than that. A cubic meter of air, there'd be about 150 mold spores in there. If I went out there today, it's getting up to 70 degrees today. We had had a little bit of rain in the past week. I'd probably go out today and measure mold spore counts, probably maybe 15,000, 20,000 spores per cubic meter, because of the temperature differential and just the different time of year. Because of that, because there are so many variables, because there's different types of molds, we don't have a threshold limit value to say that if we reach this level, we must take this action. It just doesn't exist. Some molds produce mycotoxins, and some molds are considered to be toxic as humans interact with them. Other ones are purely allergenic. So there are no EPA standards or regulations for airborne contamination anywhere. You're just not going to find them. And so looking at this little guy here coming down this, I call this golden path here. This is the inspection path. This is, the inspector, the agent, the buyer, we're all coming down this path during the inspection. Then bang, all of a sudden something happens where somebody points it out. And like Patty said, there's a substance consistent with mold. There's a mold-like substance. There's a biological substance consistent with mold. Why do we use those terms? Well, we can never say that in fact is mold. I can't say, oh, there's mold. As an inspector, I can't make that call. I don't have enough training, education to be able to determine whether or not something is mold. Even if I was a microbiologist with, a PhD behind my name, if I'm out on an inspection, as a PhD in microbiology, wouldn't be able to point to that and say, oh, that is such and such mold. I can't do it. You can't do it. So mold can only be identified in a lab setting under a microscope by someone who's highly trained to do that. That's why we use those phrases. Oh, that appears to be a mold-like substance. That appears to be a biological substance consistent with mold, those kinds of things. So here we are, we're out on the inspection, we're going down the inspection path, and all of a sudden we point and say, uh-oh, that looks like that could be mold. Maybe that's mold. What do we do? Well, at that point, there is an infinite number of possibilities where this can go. We can go into hyper freak out mode and people can start running around foaming at the mouth. We can do nothing. Just pretend it's not even there. What do we do? How do we figure out? How do we navigate this? That's what this class is about today. It's trying to come up with a path forward, to try and figure out, because there's no regulation from the government or anybody else telling us what we do. We've basically come up with some methodology to be able to help navigate this in terms of the real estate transaction. If somebody's buying a home and we see something that we think it looks like mold, or we think that there are conditions in which mold might thrive in, how do we go about and navigate that? That's what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and take you from an infinite number of possible directions to narrowing it down to a very manageable number of directions. We'll talk about that shortly. Some mold facts, some things you should know about mold. Number one, mold. If we see something we think we know, hey, that looks like mold, that's not the problem. The fact that there's mold there is not the problem. Mold's just a symptom of the problem. In our part of the country, our part of the world, water is the problem. The molds we deal with day in and day out, they are in fact wet molds. And so if we see something we think is mold, we've got a water problem, and we need to figure out what that water problem is before we can go and move forward. We got to know we can't get rid of mold. Remember I said, shake your shirts, mold's there. It's just always here. So the question is, how do we get rid of mold? Well, we're never going to get rid of mold. The question is, how do we manage mold? How do we not create microclimates in our structures, in the homes, the spaces we live in, we work in? How do we not create those microclimates in which mold can thrive? That's the question. Rare occurrences of a specific mold spore, where rare occurrence of mold spore might not be significant. What we're saying here is that if we, for instance, if we do find on some test results that we do have some, quote, toxic black mold on there, if it makes up 0.1% of the total makeup of what we saw, that's not really that big a deal. So that's what we're talking about there. When we have these living spaces, we must decrease the humidity in our living spaces to be somewhere between 30 and 60%. I actually prefer 30 to 50%. I've actually seen and been involved in inspections where people had levels at 60% and we're having some problems. So if you think about your house, and we're just coming out of the heating season, if you have a humidifier on your heating system, in order to help combat that hot, dry air when you have your furnace running, think about where that humidistat is set. Most people set their humidistats right around 35%, maybe 40%. Most people, 35% is the sweet spot. That's what's comfortable for us. That's a level at which mold's not going to thrive within a home. So want to keep humidity levels down inside the home. So what does mold do? I mean, mold's here. Let's talk a little bit about, well, first off, where does mold come from? Well, think about it. Think about where you live, where I live, right here where I'm sitting. You go back 200 years ago, 300 years ago and beyond, there wasn't anything here. There was probably a forest here. And mold was here. I wasn't here. Mold was here. And that mold, what does mold do? Well, think about it. If it's in the forest, you have all that dead plant material, deadfall, tree branches, leaves, all that stuff falls to the ground. That's where mold thrives. It thrives on, say, the forest floor. It can thrive anywhere, but that's where it thrives because there's an incredible food source for it there. It loves to feed on dead plant material. And so when we think about what's on the forest floor, tree branches and stuff falling, that's really what mold likes to eat. Now, it can eat other things. That's not its only food source. There are other things that they can thrive on. It certainly loves that bagel in the trash can, and anywhere where we're dumping, we have refuse, things like that for sure. But think about that. It likes, one of its primary food sources out in nature is dead plant material. So I'm not going to get into this spend a lot of time on this, but think about this question. What do we build our homes with? And most people say, well, probably lumber, wood, right? What is lumber? lumber's dead plant material, right? Well, what I'm saying is that when we build our homes on top of the ground, the soil, which used to be the forest, we're basically ringing the dinging the ringer bell, ringing the dinner bell. And so, we have to be very, very careful that we are not creating a situation inside the homes in which mold can thrive. We'll talk about what kind of climate, what they need for that. We should know that some molds produce mycotoxins. This is what I was referring to. Some of the mold spores that go out as they are toxic in nature, and out in nature they don't really do anything. But as mammals, as human beings, if we breathe them in, if we touch them, if we ingest them, it's as though we've ingested or inhaled or touched a toxic substance, some type of poisonous substance, and we react in a toxigenic manner to it. Other types of molds can actually produce pathogenic health responses. So what do I mean by that? It means as if we come into a high concentration of mold, whether it be through touching it, eating it, or inhaling it. And by the way, most of the time we are interacting with mold by inhaling the mold spores, by far and away the most common way that we interact with it. A pathogenic response means that we are responding as though we've become diseased or sick. We might present with flu-like symptoms. We might have a list of symptoms that very, very, very much mirror another type of disease. But by far and away, the most common way that we present, or we present with symptoms after interacting with high concentration of molds, are allergenic reactions, allergenic symptoms. It's an allergic, we are allergic to it, or we present as though we have come in contact with an allergen. And so that's by far and away the most common thing that humans present, the most common way that we react to being in high concentration of molds. Now, mold's not all bad. We just talked about the fact that it eats, feeds on our homes. It's toxic and it presents all these things. But let's look at it realistically. It's not all bad. If you've actually taken penicillin anytime in your life that made you better, we make penicillin out of penicillium, a mold. So there are many different types of molds that are used in creating different types of medicines. Molds can be considered foods. It can be used in the food process, and we can use to break down. It's used to think about cheese. Well, we use cheese. We wouldn't if you love cheese, you gotta thank mold, because wouldn't have mold cheese without molds. Used in a lot of different commercial products. So it's not all bad. We just need to learn how to live with it, right? Because it's been here right along, with us. It lives in the same spaces we live in. Mold thrives between 60 and 90 degrees, so it needs an ambiable temperature. What we're saying here, it needs moisture. So if think about this, now we're thinking about the home. So yeah, it has all this stuff out in nature. You think that it needs a good temperature, the forest floor, all that stuff, food source moisture. Yeah, it's got it there. But think about it in terms of the home. 60 to 90 degrees. Most of our homes are right around 70 degrees inside. That's right there. It needs moisture. If we have a leaking roof or a leaking building envelope or leaking basement or whatever, creates the perfect condition for mold to thrive in. And so it needs a food source as well. It needs oxygen, but it doesn't need light. And so it can thrive in a dark attic or in your crawl space or in your basement, right? And so we see this routinely. So what we need to do is to not create these microclimates in which mold can thrive. If you've got a failure in the building envelope, critical flashing, missing, water's getting into the wall cavity, we've just created a perfect climate in which a mold can thrive in. So that's what we need to avoid. So where's mold found? Well, like I said, it was on your lunch when you just ate it. It's on your clothing right now. It's inside your HVAC system. If your heater is on, it's on front and the back side of drywall. It's everywhere. It's all over. It's in the air. The question is it in a high concentration? Is it thriving? Is it actually trying to establish itself as a colony, or has it already established itself as a colony? And if so, then we've got a problem we need to deal with. And so that's what we're trying to make a determination on. Mold is found pretty much anywhere you can imagine. So mold in buildings, we perfectly fine with mold doing its thing out there in the forest, right? But when mold comes into buildings, not so much. We're not big on that idea. Like we said, mold really has found a great climate and a great food source in the buildings in which we live. What did I say? We clear off land, we build our houses, we build our houses right on top of the soil, and we build our houses with basically dead plant material, framing lumber, right? And so that's what one of mold's in nature, that's one of mold's primary food sources. The cellulose material, the sugars that are in there that it breaks down and causes to deteriorate, it's feeding on that as it's doing it. And so we've really have created homes, which are great places for mold to thrive in. So it's super, super important that we do things to minimize microclimates in which mold can thrive. You'll hear me say that over and over again. Another interesting fact is that mold, there's nothing out there going, wow, I was just thinking, shit, what should I make for lunch here? Let's see, I've got some prime rib in there. I'm going to make a grilled cheese sandwich. That's what I did. There's nothing going, man, I'd really like to have some mold for lunch. No, there is no competition. There is no predators. Nothing's looking to eat mold. Mold is basically, if you will, it's at the bottom of the food chain because it just eats all the waste is basically what it does. So that mold really is a natural part of the buildings that we build. And there are a lot of different types of very common mold. We're actually going to review some air quality test results. So we're going to actually look at them, learn how to interpret them. I'm going to actually walk through an interpretation of a couple reports and how we look at that. But there are routinely different types of mold like Cladosporium, Stachybotrys, Penicillium aspergillus, Alternaria, Chaetonium. They're just, and you don't need to know how to say all these things and certainly don't need to know how to spell them. But, knowing, like, for instance, the more common ones like, Penicillium, aspergillus, that's one that's very, very common, probably the most common in this region. Stachybotrys, Stachybotrys jetarum, that's actually what the people are afraid of when they talk about the toxic black mold. Now, most of the time, when people see mold, like if we're out on inspection and somebody goes, oh, look, there's mold on the bottom of that wall over there. First off, they shouldn't be saying that there's mold but if a buyer says that they don't know the difference. But anyway, you and I shouldn't be saying that's mold. But if there's somebody says, look, there's mold there on the bottom of the wall, and oh, it's black, and oh no, is that toxic mold? Everybody, they see mold, they think what they think is mold, and they immediately look at the color, it's black, and then immediately their mind goes to toxic black mold. I need to be terrified. The reality of it is that it's the Stachybotrys jetarum. Most people have never seen it in their life. As an inspector, as somebody who does the air quality testing all the time, as someone who's been in more crawl spaces than I care to think about, where this stuff was actually growing and thriving, I can count on this hand how many times I've been in spaces where there is a significant, large growing colony of Stachybotrys growing there. It's just not that common, although it's the one everybody's terrified about. We're going to look at some pictures of some very, very common different mold types, and you're going to see that you can't look at mold and determine what type of it is. Certainly, you can't figure out whether or not it's toxic or not. Only, again, a microbiologist in a lab can actually make that determination. So mold contamination, what we're trying to say here with this slide, excuse me. You can see, for example, we've got some mold growth on here. Let's say that there was a water intrusion issue and we fixed it. And so now you stop the water, you're going to stop the mold. The mold will begin to die off. It will no longer have a climate in which to thrive. And so it starts to die off. What we're saying here is that even, old, past, inactive growing mold, that as it's dying off can still put out mold spores, and those mold spores can be inhaled and can be a health hazard. So just want to make you aware of that. But an interesting point to know is that if you can get rid of the water, it will eventually get rid of the mold. So we throw this picture in here just so you guys can see this. We'll be a little interactive with this. Remember when I said that we're going down the inspection, the golden inspection path, and here we go. Everything's going great, la di da, everything's fine, everything. Yeah, we see this, we see that, no big deal. Then all of a sudden, the buyer sees what they think is mold, and so now they're, the anxiety level, the stress level goes up. They're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I can't live here. I can't. Whoa, wait a minute. Let's slow down. Take it one step at a time. Now, how do we navigate this? And like I said, without having any help from any regulatory bodies, there's nobody saying there's a threshold limit value telling us what to do. Anything's possible. I mean, they could turn around and run out the door, get in their car, and never come back. We never see them again. Or you have somebody go, oh, whatever, I don't care. Any number of different outcomes. So what do we do? How do we navigate this? And so what we try to do is we try to get you to a point, well, and we do, we get it to the point, okay, we think we have mold. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to recommend testing. We're going to get the air quality test results back, and we're going to get an idea of what the degree of mold that we have. Air quality test is going to show us the different types of mold present, and it's going to show us the quantities, first and foremost. Once we get that data back, that data will be able to tell us that we should do one of three things. So if we are able to collect the data, if we are able to do the air quality test and determine what level of mold we have, it's going to tell us to do A, B, or C. A is do nothing. Hey, there really isn't anything to worry about here. That's just normal. Okay. Maybe we need to do a better job of managing the water on the exterior, but maybe literally doing nothing is an option. But usually it's not. Usually we have to do option B, which is simple surface cleanup. And so, yes, okay, we think that's mold. The lab confirmed it was mold. It really wasn't a level to be concerned about at all. So primarily, I'm more concerned about why it was able to form to begin with. And maybe that's going to, we'll have to have a conversation about dealing with how we're managing the water in and around the structure. But basically, we're just going to recommend a surface mold cleanup, which anybody can do. And it's not that big a deal. You don't need to call it a mold mitigator or whatever. And then, of course, that would be option number 3, that it is a significant issue. And we are recommending intensive mold mitigation because we do have problematic fungal growth. And we really do recommend that the professionals do this. And so A, B, or C, do nothing, simple surface mold cleanup, or intensive mold mitigation. Now, most of the time we don't do A, because if we think that's mold and it was confirmed to be mold, then we are going to recommend at the minimum just do a simple surface cleanup. But that's by far and away the most common result. We generally, how often we make the recommendation for intensive mold mitigation, it's probably in the single digits. It's by far and away the recommendation is the simple surface cleanup. Not necessarily intensive mold mitigation. So Mercedes is saying, if we don't call it mold, what else could it be? Well, Mercedes, we're saying that it probably is mold. We're simply saying is that you or I, you as an agent, me as an inspector, I can't look at that and say definitively, empirically that is in fact mold. We really need to leave that up to a microbiologist in a lab. If I look at it, it probably is, and I think it's mold. It's probably mold. I just can't say 100%, with impunity that is in fact, mold. And I'll explain that. You're saying you don't want the buyer to think we're uninformed. Absolutely, that's not what we're saying. I want to say, look, pretty sure we got mold here. I just don't want to say definitively it's mold, because that also can come back on me from a legal perspective. If I say, yeah, look, you got mold here. Now all of a sudden I'm purporting to be an expert and have the ability to be able to determine what if something is mold or not, that biological substance is or not. So we use words and phrases like that primarily to protect ourselves from a legal angle. So it's not a matter of being informed or uninformed. It's simply a matter of just doing the right thing, protecting ourselves to say that, hey, in fact, this I've seen this many times. That sure does look like mold to me. I really do. But even if it is surface mold growing, and let's say I'm right, it is mold, the question still becomes, well, how much is it a concern? So that's, remember I said we come down the inspection path and there's an infinite number of ways that this could go. I need to figure out a way where I can make this simple. Simple is always the way to go. How do I simplify this? And so the way we simplify it is by saying that, okay, we either need to do this, this, or this, minimize the number of options. And so, doing a test, finding out, in fact, what is the concentration of mold that we have, then that will enable us to determine how we can move forward. And so getting back to this picture you see here, if you guys were on an inspection and you put your inspection hats on and you saw this, now you don't know anything else that's going on. You don't know if there's a roof leak. Yes, you see there's a little bit of stain here. There's something going on here, but you see all over this range. So if you saw this, would you say, okay, this is something that is do nothing, simple surface cleanup, or do we need to have the big guns out for intensive mold mitigation? Let me put it back on you guys. What do you think looking at this picture? Now, I have an opinion, and again, these are all opinions. There's no right or wrong answer here, but put it up in the chat box. Let me know what you guys think in terms of what should be done here. Do nothing, simple surface cleanup, or intensive mold mitigation. Hal says, let's get the papers off the stove before we burn it down. Yeah, so we're saying some say simple cleanup, some saying have it checked out, clean with bleach. So the clean with bleach, that's okay most of the time. But just know that there are some molds that actually thrive in chlorine. And so you want to, so we always recommend cleaning with an antimicrobial, antifungal cleaning agent. So Sharon said, I'd tell the buyer that I went to your class and it might really be simple, but we need an expert to evaluate. So yeah, have some tea and discuss the situation. I love these answers. Call in a mold expert. So yeah, so I look at this, and from my perspective, not knowing anything else, I look at this, I go, from what I can see, now I don't know, there could be something behind the wall. I don't know. I'm just saying purely based on what I see here, to me, that's simple surface mold cleanup. It's not intensive mold mitigation. Now, there could be other factors here that we don't know about, and that's why we test. We could test. Now, if I get the air quality test results back and I see that the numbers are such that, they're telling me we need to do it. That what I'm saying here is that visually, I'm seeing nothing but simple surface mold cleanup. If we compare that to, say, this next picture here, where I'm going to say that this goes beyond simple surface mold, simple surface cleanup here. Here, we got a lot more going on. Now, I can tell just from looking at this picture that this is water coming in from the outside. It's likely in the wall cavity above. We've got this isn't surface mold growing. These are well-established colonies that have been there for a real long time, different types of mold. So this goes beyond. So this, just not knowing anything else, just from what I see visually in this picture, I would be saying we need to bring in intensive mold mitigators here. In addition to figuring out where the water's coming in, we need to figure out why there's water getting into the wall cavity. So Hal said the plastic widget seems to be filled with a fill of water, so probably a roof leak. Yeah, so yeah, there definitely can be a lot going on. I mean, I look at this picture and I say, well, this could be a bank-owned property. Maybe there's a leak. Maybe it's been closed up. It's the middle of summer, high humidity inside the house, plumbing leak. Who knows what's going on inside here? Definitely. I just threw these pictures in here just based on visually what you can see. But yeah, there could be all kinds of huge problems here. And that's kind of the way we approach it. I can't tell you visually from either one of these pictures what we should do. And so that's why we see something we think is mold here. We definitely want to take action by testing. We're going to talk about in a few minutes here about the red flags that pop up. And what we want to test whenever we have any of these red flags. These are definitely some red flags we would test. The testing, as you guys will see, gives us a wealth of information that we can use to properly interpret and properly interpreting that report is a really big part of developing a prescription for remedial action and figuring out to do one of those three things. So Adair is saying, how can mold grow on a metal surface? So that's a great question, Adair. Now, I will tell you before I answer that question, I've seen mold growing on painted metal surfaces. I've seen mold growing on bare metal surfaces. I've seen mold growing on glass. I've seen mold grow on just about anything. And you ask, how can it grow there? It probably grew, mold probably grew in here because there was probably a thin film of grease on this or something like that. There was a food source where it just started to get established on there. It can grow on anything where there is something for it to feed on, and also, moisture, whether it just be in the matter in the, based on the humidity level. It's amazing where molds can grow. As Hal pointed out, I think it was Hal that said it was growing in space, on or in the International Space Station. So it can grow anywhere. I mean, it just all depends on the type of mold, the microclimate in which it's found to thrive in. So that's what we have. All great stuff, guys. So mold exposure, what's the issue? Why are we concerned about this? Well, primarily, like I said, it's from breathing mold spores. Now, we can also come into contact with it by touching it. You can touch something that has mold growing on it, or you can eat something, or even your hands, if you handled something moldy and then eat. I seriously doubt you're eating anything moldy. Most people, with their eyes, they see something has mold on it, they're not touching it. So, I'm not saying you can't, come into contact by touching it or eating it, or but they're just nowhere near as common as breathing it in. Our interaction with mold primarily, the biggest way we interact with it, the way we interact with it in the highest concentration is unquestionably breathing in mold spores, just by simply breathing the air in the space that we occupy. By far and away the most common. So the health effects of mold, number one, first and foremost, people have an allergenic reaction to it. And so we're experiencing that now. We have, you've got pollen in the air. My brother's working on his boat down in Delaware, and every day he goes down there to work on his boat, and he's just been complaining for the past week and a half about sniffling and sneezing and the pollen and the, all the stuff's just blooming and coming alive, including mold. Mold spore counts are spiking up and getting higher and higher. So by far and away the most common way that we interact with mold, and it's the inhalation of those mold spores or the touching of those mold spores. But the greatest concentration that we get is the inhalation of mold spores into our lungs. And so because we're taking those mold spores into our lungs, people if you have asthma, it can make it worse. Being exposed to a high concentration of mold can lead to asthma. There's a significant subset of the population, people who have asthma, and it was the onset was the exposure to high concentrations of mold. We're talking about millions of people. The other thing is the hypersensitivity to pneumonia. So these are people who, basically they've got, compromised systems to begin with, and then they get exposed to a high concentration of mold. And that gets, the lining of the lungs, it's almost like they react. It's like a foreign body's in there, bacterial infection, it develops, and they get pneumonia because they were exposed to a high concentration of mold. So happens all the time. We had actually an agent. I taught this class in the summertime last summer, and she shared with us that her son passed away after, and what they figured out was that basically what he was already in an immunocompromised state. So he had other things that he had been dealing with, but he had been dealing with them his whole life. And then they moved into a new location, didn't realize it, but where they moved actually had a high concentration of mold. They had a mold problem there, didn't realize it. Sons started being symptomatic, started having other things, where slowly he was getting worse and they couldn't figure it out, and going to the doctors, ended up being hospitalized. And it wasn't until then that they figured out that it was where he was dwelling, high concentration of mold. By the time they put all the pieces together, it was too late. He had actually cascading failures and ended up passing away as a result of, of being exposed. Now, it wasn't the mold that killed him. He was already immunocompromised to begin with, but it was just an extremely sad story, but it really highlighted, why we talk about this, why we're, even having this class. Yeah, people don't like dealing with mold, but it's a serious, serious health issue that can have some pretty catastrophic effects. And if we're going to be all about creating that great user experience, we do not want our clients moving into a home that's not safe. And so that's why we're focused on this. That's why we want to learn about this. All the other health effect, mycotoxics, it's as if we've ingested or come into contact with some type of poisonous substance. And then the glucans, we talked about having a pathogenic response where you present as if you're sick or flu-like symptoms. Those kinds of things definitely can result as a result of being exposed to high concentrations. And think about how difficult it is for doctors to make a diagnosis. Patient comes in, they've got flu-like symptoms. Maybe they're feverish, maybe they're aching, maybe they're sluggish, apathetic, all these different things that they're presenting with, and the doctor's trying to figure out what in the world's causing all this. Being exposed to high concentrations of mold, probably pretty far down on the list. Not to mention the fact that the person themselves might not even be aware that they're being exposed to that because of their living situation. So it's not easy for doctors to figure that out. So think about that. So why might we test? What are some of these red flags that we're talking about? Number one, remember that we deal with wet molds primarily in this region of the United States. So if we've had any type of water incursion, have we had a flood? Did we have heavy rains and water and excess water came in? Did we recently become aware that we've got a failure of a roof leak or critical flashing details that have failed or were just missing and have been allowing water to come in? Have we had any kind of water intrusion? Another reason, another reason to test is visible mold. And look at this. Look at all the biodiversity here. Velvety, slimy, white, black, green, pink, yellow, purple, smelly, not smelly, all these different things where we think we see something that's mold, we're pretty sure it's mold, and it can have all these different looks to it. And so good idea to test for mold, do the types of testing that we're talking about if in fact we see things like this. So this is saying that up to 50% of homes have been water compromised. Well, I actually think the number is higher than that. We do a ton of stucco inspections, the building envelope moisture intrusion inspections. We also do oversight inspections. So we get to see what the structure looks like when the cladding comes off, when the stucco comes off, the siding comes off, when the bare structure is exposed. And what we find is that there are areas all over the place where water has been getting in and getting past the system. Now, most of the time, it's not causing any kind of significant structural deterioration or any catastrophic failures. Most of the time, it's not. But that still is, there still are these areas all over. And I don't care whether you have vinyl siding or stucco or whatever, there are areas on your building envelope on most houses where water is finding its way to the substrate. Hopefully, it's in an area that's getting a lot of air movement and it dries out relatively quickly and it's not a problem. But if we do find that we are become aware of any kind of failure in the building envelope, good idea to test. Any kind of discoloration, we're talking about the interior of the house or where you have high relative humidity, that's the RH is relative humidity, anything above 60%. I actually, 50% is the number that I typically use, only because I give you an example. We did an inspection, home inspection a few years back, and after about a year, the client was living, excuse me, I think it's my nap time. Sorry about that, guys. So we did an inspection on this beautiful townhouse in Manayunk. It was an end unit, 4 stories, brick structure. It was actually wood frame structure with a brick veneer. Beautiful, beautiful townhome, and like a rooftop observation deck and everything. Well, they called us up after being in the house. I don't think they were in the house for a year. And they said, look, you guys did our home inspections and we're seeing some things that are a little abnormal. Like we think we see what we think is mold growing in the bathrooms. And we have condensation on the windows almost year round. Just there's some things that just don't look right. And we want, can you come check it out? So we did. So we went in, kind of did a bit of a forensic inspection, trying to figure out what they had going on. We were testing interior humidity levels. We were testing all kinds of different things. And what we ended up concluding was that the house, number one, had a ventilation issue. They also had an issue with an oversized air conditioning system. People think, oh, bigger is better. Well, not when it comes to air conditioning. Air conditioning needs to be properly sized. In this particular case, I don't know why, but the builder put on an air conditioning unit that was way oversized for the structure. So what happened? Well, the thermostat, you would get a call for cooling and boom, it would come on. It would quickly cool the house down. But air conditioners work by not only do they actually extract the heat from within the living space and put it outside, but they also take humidity out from the house and they're, and bringing the temperature down by removing heat and humidity. Well, if you have an oversized air conditioning system, you will quickly remove the heat, but you're not removing the humidity. And so the humidity levels were abnormally high in this home. And in addition to the oversized air conditioning system, they also had their bathroom vents. Everything was vented into one singular stack, all the bathroom vents. And so when they would take a shower or whatever, what we found was that the fans that they had on the bathrooms weren't powerful enough to put the moist hot air all the way up and outside the house. And so that was another issue. There was a number of different things that led to it. But what we found inside the house is they consistently had interior relative humidity levels of 60 to 65%. And we needed to find a way to bring those humidity levels down to a comfortable level, actually cutting them in half down somewhere around 30 to 35%. And we were able to suggest some things. The builder implemented some things and they were able to get there, and no longer did they have problems with mold growing on the surfaces inside their home. But if you do have discoloration, or if you are aware of a high relative humidity within the home, good idea to test. Construction defects. Remember I said critical flashing details missing, things like missing kick out flashing, missing through wall flashing, head flashing over windows, different things where there are flashing details required where the builder just forgets to put them in. Doesn't always mean there's going to be a failure or that you're going to have a breach of the building envelope, but by not putting them in, they exponentially increase the possibility of that happening. And if we do find that that has happened, then, in that particular case, that we need to take action. One of the first things you should do is do the air quality test. Other reason is human sensitivity. You say, well, what do I mean by that? Well, when I first started doing inspections, I came out of construction management. And first time I had somebody tell me that, hey, you're doing an inspection here. Can you pay particular attention to this room? Every time I walk into this room, I just don't feel well. I just don't feel something. And they start talking about how they feel and something's off. And when I first heard that, I just myself, without having any experience, I immediately thought to myself, oh boy, we got a live one here. Here we go. Oh boy. I didn't roll my eyes because I don't want to be disrespectful, but what I found, I at least I wasn't completely stupid. and I did follow and do what they asked me to do. But guess what? In doing what they asked me to do, it completely, I did a 180 in terms of what I found was that when somebody tells me that, the degree with which you're usually right, that the percentage of time with which they're usually right is extremely high. I mean, now somebody tells me whenever they walk in a room, they feel something's off, man, the radar goes up. I'm completely focused on what they have to say just because I've seen the accuracy with that is extremely high, at least based on my experience. I can cite one example where I was doing a stucco inspection, big house. It was an expensive house. It had a brick veneer on the front, so wood framed house with a brick veneer on the front, and the two sides and the rear had stucco. Well, I was there to look at the stucco, so I'm looking at the side walls and the rear wall. Well, the owner of the house, I think we were doing it for the buyer, but the owner of the house actually asked me if I would check out her son's room, which was facing the front. So it had on the outside wall, there was brick, not stucco. But she said every time she goes into that room, she could just feel it or sense it. She just, something was different, sinuses, whatever, scratchiness in her throat. Something was bothering her every time she went in there. And she says, I know something's going on here, but I don't see any evidence of it anywhere. So I'm happy to take a look. I'll be happy to look at that. So I looked at that, and first thing I'm doing is looking with my flashlight. No evidence of anything at all. Everything looks perfectly normal. Then I'm taking my thermal imaging camera and I'm scanning the walls and the ceiling, and I'm looking, and all I see is very well-defined structure. Everything looks good till I come over here. Oh, wait a minute. Under the corner of this window, I have a little something going on. I have a little anomaly. There's something out of the ordinary. Now, thermal imaging camera doesn't find moisture. It just shows temperature differentials. And typically what I see is well-defined structure. I can see the outline, the shadow of studs and plates and headers, and sometimes even the drywall screws and things like that. But when I come to a little globular, non-well-defined anomaly, it tells me that something might be going on here, and that's what we found there. So I take my surface moisture tester out, and son of a gun, there's a high moisture here. And so what we were able to figure out, and after further investigation, was that there was a failure of the building envelope. Where the window frame was and the brick met up to it, there was a failure there. Water was getting into the wall cavity, and she was 100% right. And she just knew that. She could sense it just because she was that sensitive to it. I am not that sensitive to it. My wife will tell you I'm pretty much adult. I'm not really sensitive to much of anything, but a lot of people are, and so I always pay attention to that. So itching eyes, burning sensation on the skin, musty odor. People think, oh, it's musty mildew. Well, guess what it is? A musty smell, mildew. That's a mold. That's mold takes all. Mold can be algae on the outside of the house. There can be an algae bloom in the in a body of water. It's all the same thing. They are mold spores, and so it's all the same. So absolutely a good reason to test. So if you see something that smells, it's got an odor, mold can be seen in any color, visibility of water knowledge of a recent leak or any kind of damage, cold damp surfaces, all those are really good reasons, red flags, why you will very likely want to do some testing. So why do we sample? Why do we do the testing? Well, primarily it's to answer the question, do I have mold growing in my home? Now, I don't like that. I don't do it. Do you have mold growing in your home? That's kind of it's a tough one. I like to ask the question, do you have mold thriving in your home? And I'm not, doing a very good job of spelling there, but that's the thing I want to find out. Do you have mold in your home? Yes, I guarantee you do. You do, I do. Mold's always with us. Do you have mold growing in your home? Maybe. The question is it landed? Is it growing anywhere? If it does, I don't care unless mold starts to thrive. That's the big thing. As mold, is it thriving? And the other question is, why do we test? Well, it's to find out if people are being exposed to a higher amounts of mold than what's in the background concentration. What is the background concentration? Well, it's what's outside of the house, what's out there today. If I walk down the street, that's what I consider to be a normal level of exposure to mold. Now, different times of the year, it's going to be different. I walk down the street in February, it's going to be a lot different than walking down the street in July, in terms of mold levels. But whatever's outside is the norm. So what we'll do whenever we do any kind of testing, the first thing we do is take an exterior control sample, and that gives us the background concentration to compare all the interior samples to. And you'll see that when we do look at a report. So the other reason why we might sample is to solve building defects. We use this all the time. People call up, they say, hey, I've got something going on here. I've got a leak. I've got this, I've got that. And so we'll do whatever level of testing we can do, but quite often we also include the air quality test, because if we can't see exactly what we have going on, we might suspect that water's getting into the wall cavity. But the question is, do we just have some intermittent water getting in there and it dries out and there's not a whole lot going on in there? Or is it constantly being supplied and we've got a tremendously big colony of mold growing in there? And in the room adjacent, the same room where that is, we have a mold concentration of 700,000 spores per cubic meter. Well, you're not going to see that with the naked eye. And so this is what we, utilize the air quality test to help us, to give us an indication as to what we have going on. So generally, there's two different types of mold sampling. Before we get into that, Glenn has a comment here or a question. Do you think that the materials being used for flashing, such as Vicor and similar products, are more conducive to breakdown and water infiltration? I'm not familiar with Vicor. I'm not sure if you're referring to Tyvek or so I expect to see water infiltration trouble in the coming years with how properties are being thrown up, especially in Philadelphia and gentrified areas, although the city is trying to require third-party approval for the envelope. Yeah, so I agree with you, Glenn. I'm seeing I call the Philadelphia the wild, wild west when it comes to new construction. We're seeing all kinds of different things in terms of how people are preparing the building envelope. Now, we've definitely made some strides. There's definitely much more awareness to properly preparing the building envelope for the installation of a cladding system than there was, say, even 10 years ago. We're starting to see, just like you said, Philadelphia requiring third-party approval for building envelope inspection. So generally, as a rule, most authorities, most code enforcement bodies do not inspect to see whether or not the building envelope protection was properly applied. They generally leave that up to the installer, the project manager, which I have a problem with. I think code enforcement should, if they're going to check out the framing, they should check out the protection of the structure as well with regards to the building envelope. It's not that difficult to do. It's definitely another inspection that could be performed. It's another revenue stream for them for another inspection. No reason for them not to be doing that. That being said, legally, they're completely, there's nothing you can do about that. So, but I'm seeing the same thing that you're seeing, Glenn, and that is that in the city of Philadelphia, as well as other areas, a lot of different alternative new types of cladding systems going on. Each one of those, in fact, when we talk about cladding systems, we're talking about the siding that goes on, whether it's stucco, whether it's a cementatious board or some other kind of building panels or decorative panels, whatever it is. Number one, the number one thing that you need to follow is the manufacturer's instructions. That supersedes everything. That supersedes the building codes, the International Building Code, the International Residential Code. It supersedes the ASTM standards. That supersedes everything. But, subsequent to that, they need to follow the building code and the ASTM standards as well. And what we're seeing is that that's not being done. So I do think that, yes, while today we have the stucco problem that everybody's aware of, I agree with you. I think that going forward into the future, we're already seeing it. We get called out to do level 1, level 2 invasive testing on buildings with vinyl siding and with brick and with cementatious board. So we're already seeing it. So I do think that this is going to be something that's ongoing until it's regulated to protect structures when they're being built with regards to this building envelope protection. I do think there's going to be an ongoing problem. I agree. So 2 different ways that we test for mold. And number 1 is the surface lift method. This is where we use a tape lift or a swab for the sample collection. Very rudimentary. The other is the air quality test for mold concentration, where we use a spore trap for the sample to actually to collect a certain sample of air. So let's take a look at that. So the swab or the tape lift, very, very straightforward. It's simple. If we're going to use a tape lift, basically it's just that. We take a piece of what they call bio tape, where it's, it comes up, it's sealed, and you peel it off. You put it on top of what you think is mold. You take that and you put it onto a slide, and then you send it off to the lab. The microbiologist looks at it under the microscope, and they go, "Oh yes, okay." Or they do the same thing with the swab. You take the little test tube and you pull it out, and you swab the area, you put it back in, send it off to the lab, and the lab looks at it and goes, "Yep, this is cladosporium." And you go, "Okay, I was pretty sure it was mold to begin with. Now you tell me that it is. What do I do with that information?" You you've confirmed that it's mold. Okay, well, that's why I'm not a big fan of the swab or the tape lift, particularly with regards to the real estate transactions. While it does give you some information, it confirms the presence of mold and also identifies the species that you happen to pick up with the sample that you took. It's not giving you a wealth of information. Um, we prefer the air sampling method, and the reason we do is because of what we get back from the lab. So the first thing we do is we set up a sample outside. We take a sample. Now, when we take a sample, we're using this little box on the tripod is actually an air pump. And we actually put a spore trap on top of it and draw in a specific quantity of air using the pump that's calibrated, a specific quantity of air through that trap. Typically, we'll run the test for exactly 10 minutes, drawing in exactly 15 liters of air per minute, giving us 115 liters of air drawn across that sample for each test. And so we'll do that on the outside, and then we'll also test each individual interior location that we want to test, areas, basements, attic, wherever we think we have a problem. We can even test inside wall cavities, different things like that. So we'll test all of those. And then what we'll do is we'll also, in conjunction with that, we typically are doing testing. We're looking and doing an investigation. Remember, we're looking to see what the concentration of mold is, but if we're doing that, it's usually because we suspect something's going on. And if there's something going on, we want to know what it is. Why do we think that there's a water problem to begin with? Remember, excuse me, mold's not the problem. Mold's the symptom. The problem is the water intrusion. And so it's a really good idea. If you're doing it in conjunction with a home inspection, that's great, because we're going to get all these other data points, all these other points of fact that relate to what's going on with the structure, why there might be a water intrusion problem. So we get the lab results back, and it's not just, it won't be a singular page, but there's actually a lot of detail. We're not going to go into great detail on this, but you can see that in this example, this isn't a singular line item saying, yes, it was mold and it was Alternaria. We're actually seeing that this was the basement space, 150 liters of air. What I typically do is go right down to this line. I want to see what the total spore count per cubic meter is. That's what this column is. This column is the raw count. This column is the percent of the total. I go right to the center column and I go right to this line. I want to know, what is the total spore count? In this particular case, you can see it's 146,000 spores per cubic meter. It's a lot higher than we would typically want to see. If I was going to, ideally, I would prefer to always see something less than 1,000 spores per cubic meter. But there are times when, let's say that it's in the summertime and it's hot and it's humid and we've had rain, and maybe the total spore count outside is 40,000 spores per cubic meter. So what I'm going to want to see on the inside is maybe 10 times less than that, maybe 4,000 spores per cubic meter. Now, there's going to be a subset of the population that even at 4,000 spores per cubic meter, even at 1,000 spores per cubic meter, roughly about 20% of the population is just going to start to present with some allergenic symptoms when exposed to those concentrations. So, you can see we've got a little bit of a framework to work in, a little bit of a frame of reference. There are no threshold limit values. So, but we still have a framework that we kind of work within. So when I look at this, I see 146,000 spores per cubic meter. That's significantly higher than I would want to see. That's way more than 10, that's way above what the background concentration was. So we're going to look at some reports in some great detail. The other thing you're going to see, the particle identification column, they're showing you all these different types of molds and the raw count. The raw count is actually what the microbiologist saw in the lab, looking at the spore trap, counting and identifying those mold spores. And then we've also got some interpretation from the lab here. Now, the interpretation from the lab is not the definitive interpretation. The lab's simply, this interpretation is based purely on math. It's not, it's not based on what's actually going on at the property. So the lab doesn't know anything with regards to, water intrusion, anything like that. what's happening. So all they're doing is just comparing these samples to the background concentration and coming up with an interpretation purely based on mathematical calculations. So, well, like I said, we'll break that down in more detail here very, very shortly. Just some examples of some different types of mold that we run into all the time. You can see this is cladosporium, very common. We see it all the time. What I want you guys to pay attention to is look how different it looks. You know, the color is kind of the same here in these two examples, but very, very different form and structure. So it makes it very difficult to identify it. This type of mold, cladosporium, very, very commonly found inside the home. It's found on carpets, curtains, upholstery, wallpaper. It loves the dark, moist places like under the sink and in the bathroom corners. You know, and look at this. It usually appears in green, black, or yellow dots and continues to grow in clusters. Let me make a note because I need to make some adjustments on that. Sorry, that slide's not the way it should be formatted. But you know, the diversity is amazing. You know, some other pictures here, it's growing around the, you know, the window. Here we've got it growing around an air vent, and you know, it can show up pretty much anywhere. So other examples here, you know, we've got cladosporium. What was identified as cladosporium here, growing on the inside corner. You can see this is crown molding. You got some growing on the ceiling, some growing on the sidewall. You say, well, why in the world would it be growing there? Well, water's getting into the wall cavity, and one likely scenario here is that it is getting into the wall because of missing flit. You see, we got missing kickout flashing here. Whenever that kickout flashing is missing, we have the potential for water getting in the wall cavity. And you can see that in this picture where this is all highlighted in yellow, this is an area where they have anticipated damage. And this is what it might look like on the inside of the house. Here's Rubber Ducky. He looks clean as a whistle, nothing growing on him. He's too cool for that, right? But you can see these other areas here on the grout lines and on the caulk where you've got that cladosporium growing. And so if your bathtub looks like this, don't panic. Basically, you can cut this caulk out. You can clean the grout, clean them again, antimicrobial cleaning agent, antifungal cleaning agent. Yes, you can use bleach, but just know some molds thrive in chlorine. So we do recommend the other. If you don't use it, if you use bleach, 99% of the time you're going to be fine. So how about Aspergillus penicillium, another kind of mold that we see routinely, very commonly. Aspergillus, probably the most common one we see. Houses never look inside the rubber duck. I haven't looked inside the rubber duck, Hal, and I'm going to follow your advice and never look in there. So very, very common. In fact, when we do air quality tests and get the results back, by far and away, this particular line item is the one that usually has the highest concentration. Not always, but usually has the highest concentration. Very, very common mold that we find outside. This species has been isolated to damp walls, paper wall coverings, gypsum board. Kind of sounds familiar. So it's also prevalent on floors, carpet, mattress dust, and upholstered furniture dust. Some acrylic paints contract this type of mold, and it's also found on HVA insulation filters, fans, humidifiers, water heater. So yeah, the mold can show up pretty much anywhere. So we look at these examples here. You can see, obviously, we got something going on. First and foremost, so Hal's saying should have been clearer. The amount of mold inside bath toys will scare you. Yes, I can imagine. I'm sure. Yeah, it's a place that constantly gets replenished with moisture, and it's a perfect environment. So, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. There's a perfect example. You're going back to the rubber ducky here. Inside the rubber ducky is the perfect microclimate in which mold can thrive. Those are what we need to seek out. Those are what we need to try to eliminate so that mold cannot thrive. And so what do we have here? Other microclimates. So you have mold growing all over every surface inside the house, but something is going on here. You can see that, number one, we've got a brick veneer on the outside of this building. and we have the window frame. So obviously there's some kind of failure with the building envelope. Water's getting in here, maybe missing flashing, maybe another kind of issue, but water's getting in here. You've got mold growing on the surface here. Now here you've got it growing on the inside corner of it's not growing everywhere in the room, but it's concentrated here. It's concentrated here because on the inside corner down at the floor, because there is some kind of moisture source here. And there is some type of little microclimate inside the wall back here that's creating this problem. The moisture is migrating through the wall there. So always want to be aware of those things. Some more examples where we might find the aspergillus. Stachybotrys, here's the one. This is the black mold. This is the one everybody's afraid of. Like I said, most people have never seen it. Most people have certainly never, been affected by it. I've been in crawl spaces where there's been significant amounts of this, where really, really high concentrations of it. Like I said, I can count on this hand how many times I've seen super high concentrations of it. Doesn't happen that often. Every time I've encountered it, it's been in a crawl space where there was a dirt floor and there was typically some type of plumbing leak, as well as tremendous mismanagement of water and a very, very wet space down there. And it was not a space that you wanted to spend any time in. And so that's one of the things that's a hazard that home inspectors run into is we're going to get into that crawl space and start looking around. And sometimes it might take us 5-10 minutes in a crawl space before we realize there is a significant hazard down there. And so I've been in those. And I'll tell you guys, you don't want to go into basements or crawl spaces or anything like that where there is a significant mold problem. I've been in them where, we're not talking about 1,000 spores or 10,000 spores or 100,000 spores per cubic meter. I've been in some of those crawl spaces where we've tested them and been in spaces where it's approaching 1 million spores per cubic meter. And when I've been in those spaces, I'm not sensitive to that. I generally don't have allergenic reactions to it. I don't, have any hypersensitivity to it, but having been in some of those spaces after that, for a few days after that, I could feel it in my lungs. I didn't feel good. So it's, definitely something to be aware of. Always want to take precaution and protect yourself. So Stachybotrys, it's known as the black mold, toxic black mold. Sometimes they call it black mold, but and I've seen it where it appears as a greenish black, a deep, dark green, almost looked like a bat wing. It kind of like it created a film over this particular area that I had seen it in. It was found on drywall, drop ceiling tiles, wood or soaked wood pat. Sound familiar? It sounds like the other ones, right? So as with the other two, primarily it's respiratory in nature is how it's a danger to human beings. Here it is, going back to the very first picture, beauty in the eyes of the beholder, Stachybotrys in under a microscope. Look at it, beautiful, stunning. I would hang that, put a picture frame around it, hang it on the wall. But inside a home, not so much, right? So it doesn't look that great. And we definitely don't want to have to deal with it if it's, particularly with regards to a real estate transaction. So more examples of it. So what happens? Okay, we think we've found mold. We tested, we have mold. We figured it's mold. We need to figure out that we need to get rid of it. And so what do? What different types of mold removal are there? Well, remember I said, basically we break it down into, there's many different ways that you can go about cleaning up mold, but primarily they fall into two categories. Number one is just a surface cleanup, or number two is intensive. And I'll explain the difference here in just a minute. Somebody's asking what time's the class finished. We got about 19 more minutes before we're finished. We need to go to 3 o'clock in order to fulfill the state requirements. So two different types, surface cleanup or intensive mold mitigation. So surface cleanup, anybody can do it. Anybody can follow. And this is a great resource right here, the EPA.gov. And, the mold in your home, they're going to walk you through different recommendations for cleaning up mold, personal protective equipment. How do you go about cleaning everything up? And it's, going to be pretty, they do a pretty good job of breaking that down for us. So great resource there. So Simple surface mold cleanup, you just want to protect yourself and you want to use the, antimicrobial cleaning agent to clean things off, make sure everything's good and clean. But the big thing is that if you think you have mold, you got to figure out why it became a problem to begin with, and that's take care of the water problem. The other thing, if you need to do intensive mold mitigation, now you're starting to get involved where you're going to need professionals. Basically, they're going to cocoon an area off, seal it off. They generally create negative air and pump the air out, and so the air doesn't come into the rest of the living space. And they go in and they scrub everything down. What they're going for there when they're done is generally you've got a pretty high concentration of mold spores in that space. And after they're done, they're going to try to get, if it was 400,000 or 500,000 spores per cubic meter, they're going to try to get it down to the next time they test as a clearance test when they're done, to see levels down somewhere south of less than 1,000 spores per cubic meter is what they're going for while that space is under negative air. And so Maurice is asking, do the professionals also help determine where the problem originated? Unfortunately, Maurice, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so that is so critical to determine where the problem originated and what needs to be done to mitigate the source of the water intrusion problem. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars on a mold cleanup, and if you don't do it, if you don't mitigate the source of the moisture and make sure that the moisture doesn't get in there again, you'll be right back where you started. And that applies to intensive mold mitigation as well as just simple surface cleanup. Sometimes we do our inspections and people will go and we'll make a recommendation. Hey, we saw mold and we think the mold's coming in because of mismanagement of the water around the structure. Water's migrating through the foundation wall in the basement. That's where we saw what we thought was mold. We recommend that the mold be cleaned up and you mitigate the source of the moisture. And so the buyer will give that to the seller. And what's the seller do? All the seller does is they just come in and do quick, they clean up everything with bleach, spray it down, done, hey, problem solved. And they report back, everything's good, mold's gone. Well, that doesn't do anything for the buyer, because remember, is that going to be a great user experience for the buyer? If the buyer moves into that home and 3 months later that mold comes back, do you think that buyer is going to be happy? No. Do you think that buyer is going to be very upset with the seller and the agents and everybody else? Do you think that buyer is going to be recommending their agents? No. So that's not a good situation for anybody. So we want to make sure we always mitigate the source of the moisture and solve that problem before. Mold cleanup is secondary to solving the source of the moisture. And so, Maurice, we have a vendor list that we can provide to you guys. That the guys that are on that list actually are aware of what the process, like we teach, we talk about. ACI Tech's one of them. Mold Dogs, there's a couple of them that are on that list we can absolutely provide. So Patty, if you can remember, we want to provide the vendor list to everybody so that they can get those mold contractors on there. So that's what we're talking about there with the mold cleanup. It's got to be done right. You got to protect yourself if you're going to go into these spaces where there's mold. Now, if we're saying that, hey, it's really high and we're recommending intensive mold mitigation, we're not recommending a homeowner or a handyman go in there and do that. We really recommend professionals. But if it's something where, let's say we have 1,000 spores or 5,000 spores per cubic meter, and it really doesn't look that bad, we'll look at a couple of examples like that here in a minute. Then yeah, anybody can clean that up. But again, the primary thing we need to focus on is stopping the source of the moisture. Excuse me. So here's some questions that you guys might get asked. We get asked these questions. You might get asked these questions, and now you'll be able to have, if you didn't have these answers before, you'll be able to have some answers. You'll be able to respond to this. And so, and they might not be, the response here might not be exactly what you think it would be. So looking at this first one, somebody might ask you, hey, that looks like mold. What kind of mold is it? Is it toxic mold? Well, we get asked that question all the time. And the answer is, I don't know. And there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. That's a perfectly good answer if that's the truth. The reality of it is that looks like mold to me. Based on all my experience, my best guess is that is mold. I can't confirm it's mold. And I certainly can't tell you whether or not it's toxic. I can't tell. Only a microbiologist in a lab can answer that question. So if we do see something we think is mold, it's a good idea to test for it, is what we're saying. So answer the question, well, how did mold get into my house? Well, that goes back to, remember this? So mold's always with us. It's there. Mold comes in our house right now. Mold's coming into my house because I have my door open and the dogs are coming in and out, off of the deck. And so every time we open the door and close the door, every time we walk outside and walk back inside, we bring mold back in the house with us. That's not the question. The mold spores, they come on, they're looking to reproduce and thrive, right? So when we bring those mold spores back in, or the dogs come back in, the dogs shake and mold spores go everywhere. Where does that mold settle out? Most of the time it just settles out, it dies, it doesn't have anywhere to thrive. But if it finds that little nook or cranny where there's moisture getting in there, that's a little microclimate in which it can thrive. If it gets into the basement, there's water leaking in down there and it's high level of humidity down in the basement. Well, guess what? Mold's going to go, ooh, this feels quite comfortable. And so that's so how can I tell if there is mold in my house? Well, there is mold in your house. The question is mold thriving? So how do we answer the question, how can I stop it from thriving? Well, eliminate those sources of moisture, which create those microclimates in which it can thrive. So how's mold tested and how's it measured? Well, two different questions, right? We talked about the two primary means of testing, whether it be some type of lift method or an air quality test. That's how we test. How can it be measured? You can't measure it with a tape lift or a swab. You have to measure it by measuring the concentration of mold spores. You can go down and measure a colony of mold, but that's not going to give you much information. Measuring the concentration of mold spores in the air is an excellent indicator as to the degree of a problem that you may or may not have. And so keep in mind, when we do testing, quite often the results of the test are to confirm for the people, the buyers, the people that are concerned, that there really isn't any issue here to be concerned about. And so it's it's actually giving them peace of mind that, hey, we thought that there was a little bit of surface mold, maybe that was, but this is such a non-issue. Yeah, you want to clean that up. We want to stop the, do this or do that, to tweak this or tweak that to stop this from happening, but it's extremely minor and it's not much of an issue at all. So quite often that is the results. How do we prevent it from returning? You stop the moisture. You stop the moisture, you'll stop the mold. What are the risks? There are all those health risks we talked about, the pathogenic, the toxigenic, the allergenic reactions people can have to these high levels of exposure to mold concentration. The so what? Remember, we said the big thing, water is the problem, mold's just the symptom. You always want to check for visible water damage. You think there might have been something going on, you do your visual inspection. And if you do find some evidence, maybe something's tipping you off, you always want to consider what could possibly be going on behind. Consider the hidden water damage. Anytime you have any of those red flags, you want to do a test, see what you have going on. So the 10 most important things, this is just going to be a quick review before we actually look at a couple of reports. So number one is the potential health effects. And this should say symptoms. Another spot that needs. Sorry about that. Mostly allergenic symptoms, and they're because of the breathing in of mold spores, respiratory related. So the way to control indoor mold, hey, we all have mold in our house. Like I said, it's right here. It's just going by right now. It's always here. So the way we control it is to control the indoor moisture, keep humidity levels down, keep the sources of moisture down. Don't, good maintenance. All the water coming off the structure, get it out away from the structure as quickly as possible. If we have a mold problem, first thing we got to do, you want to clean it up. I don't even like the order. I don't like the way this sentence is structured. If you have what you think is a mold problem, first and foremost, you don't have a mold problem. You've got a water intrusion problem. You fix that first, and then you deal with any mold that you have. That's the way to go about it. This kind of has it backwards. After finding the problem, you got to fix the source of the problem. I like to turn that upside down. I want to say that, hey, okay, if you think, okay, you have mold, it's been confirmed you have mold. Mold's telling you that you've got a problem that needs to be fixed. Mold's the symptom, not the problem. Mold needs to be cleaned up, but it's the water that's the problem. Reducing indoor humidity levels, definitely something we want to do. We want to keep the indoor relative humidity down to levels around 30, 35%, maybe 40%. We don't really want to get any much above that. It's not comfortable to humans living in higher levels of humidity like that in our living spaces. So, we want to keep the humidity levels down. Sometimes that's the recommendation. In fact, that's probably the primary recommendation that we make is, let's say water, is getting into the basement. There's a little bit of mold growth down there. It's not a level that's overly concerning. So we want to, manage the water, rain gutters flowing properly, routing water away, proper grading, no water minimizing the amount of water that's coming into the basement. And then, yes, maybe we need to bring in some dehumidifiers to bring humidity levels down. Maybe they need to be permanent fixtures in the basement. So all good part of good water management. So if we do have mold growing on anything, you want to make sure even, anything that's a hard surface, you want to clean it with an antimicrobial, antifungal cleaning agent. And soft surfaces, if they've been, contaminated with mold, you really might want to consider replacing them. Preventing condensation, remember, that's part of keeping the relative humidity levels down. And then in areas where there is perpetual moisture, you might want to consider not installing these soft surfaces. This is particularly true for basements. So remember, I've seen mold growing on glass. I've seen it growing on steel. You saw it growing on that that range in the kitchen, that oven. It can grow pretty much anywhere. So just want to be aware of that. What are we saying? Well, we're saying that real estate deals don't need to be broken. In order to bring homes back to the pre-loss condition, we need to figure out what to do. And so if there is mold growth in the home, this is so important. Proper interpretation of the mold report is absolutely critical to determining what we do. And remember what we said. We think we found mold going down that inspection path. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Well, we try to make it simple. We try to say do nothing, simple surface mold cleanup, or bring in intensive mold mitigators. And so that's the way we do it. But the only way to do that is to do the testing, to see what concentrations of mold we have, and then to properly interpret those results, to develop a plan of action. Too many times, I'm very, very frustrated with the inspection industry. I see it every single day. Somebody comes back to me and asks questions and says, oh, I had an inspector and they told me that this was wrong, but they didn't give me any clues to what to do, how to move forward. Inspectors are supposed to be able to provide a path toward a solution. That's part of what we're supposed to do. So developing, properly interpreting the empirical data that we have in front of us so that we can develop a a prescription for a plan of action is absolutely, that doesn't mean we got to tell you step by step what to do, but we need to be able to put you on that path to move forward. So that's what it's all about. Guys, we are at the end. Before we wrap up, I want to pop up this, a couple samples here for us to take a look at. So let's do that. So here's a couple sample reports. And so let's take a look at those. So when we do the air quality testing, we generally, like I said, we do the exterior control sample first. And so that's the first thing we're going to look at here. You can see this is the exterior control sample. This is 150 liters of air. This is the background concentration. And remember what's the first thing I said I always look at when I'm looking at an air quality, the mold reports? First thing I look at is the total fungi count. How many parts, how many spores per cubic meter? And in this particular case, almost 13,000, 12,740. Then the next thing I'm going to look at is the percent of total. Obviously, this is 100%. So what is the biggest concentration? You can see here, the Basidiospores make up almost 92% of what we're seeing outside at the time of the inspection. Now, this particular inspection was done in November of 2018. And so that's basically what I need to know on the first page. This is what I'm seeing is going on outside at the time of the inspection. So this is what we're going to be comparing everything to. This is the background concentration. And so looking on the interior, the first thing that was tested, okay, for some reason we did the bathroom upstairs. A little unusual. Normally we do the basement and say the living space right above the basement, but other times we find other things. And so in this particular case, the inspector did the bathroom. And so this was an interior sample. And remember, first place I looked, total fungi here, 1720. Remember, there was 12,740 total spores per cubic meter outside. So this number here, this is a good number. I mean, I would like to see it less than 1,000, but it's, it's not 1/10 of what's outside, but it's close. You can see the lab thought it was an acceptable level because it's significantly lower than the background concentration. And basically, I would concur. So a little bit higher than I'd like to see. So the next thing I do is I come up here. Remember, our Basidiospores made 22%. Well, now the Basidiospores are only making a little less than 40%. Now Aspergillus penicillium is making up almost 52% of what we're seeing. So that's how I look at this and start to interpret this. You can see the lab said, okay, this is slightly elevated. So what do we have going on here? 1,700 spores per cubic meter, not off the charts. It's not a bad number at all. Certainly not going to need intensive mold mitigation. So what do we have going on here? Well, number one, it's in the bathroom. So definitely a moisture source there. So more than likely, we've got some failing caulk. We've got maybe some areas where maybe we need to do a better job of managing the water. Maybe we need to take some caulk out and replace it, some failing grout joints, whatever. We need to do a little bit better job of managing the water in this bathroom. Surface mold cleanup after we do that, and we're probably going to be fine going forward. So how about the next area? Where else did we test? Well, we also tested the basement in this particular location. So remember, first place I look is the total fungi count. Total spores per cubic meter. What do we have? 9,600. Well, this is actually, this is higher than we would want to see. 9,600. Remember what we had outside, 12,740. So 9,600, even though the lab's saying this is acceptable, I don't consider this to be acceptable. Now, I'm not saying that we need to do intensive mold mitigation. After looking at everything here, I don't think that's what needs to be done. I do think that we have water that's migrating through the basement foundation wall. In this particular case, it was an unfinished basement with a block foundation. Water was migrating through the walls, and there was mold growing along the bottom portions of the walls. And it is a little bit more than we would like to see. A lot of people are going to be uncomfortable in this space. They're probably going to get allergenic symptoms. So what are we recommending here? Well, we're recommending let's do a better job of managing the water coming off the structure. Proper grading, downspouts, gutters, all that stuff working good. We do all that stuff. And yes, maybe we need to also clean up the mold on the surface. Maybe we need to paint the foundation walls with a basement waterproofer. And yes, maybe we need to bring in a commercial dehumidifier to bring the humidity levels down in the space. All simple things, a handyman or whoever can do these things. We don't need to bring in the big guns here. So that was basically the recommendation on this one. So this was we consider to be a minor issue. Definitely need to take some action. We're going to give them a plan of action, a recommendation moving forward, but not something where we would recommend intensive mold mitigation. Sharon's saying, if you are taking samples during a home inspection, how long does it take to get the report back with the results? So what we typically do is when we pull the samples, and when we leave the inspection, we usually go right to a FedEx drop-off point or the lab drop-off point itself, whether the lab we use is in Cinnaminson. They've also got another satellite over in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. So we either drop off at one of those points or FedEx. If we drop off at FedEx, we are overnighting the lab results to the lab. They typically get the results and take 2 days to turn them around. So if we pull a sample on, say, a Tuesday, typically we're getting the results back on a Thursday, maybe Friday at the latest. So pretty quick turnaround time. So the other thing that we're looking at here is, here's another report. So on this report, let me scroll forward here. So in this particular case, this is the exterior control sample. Looking at the control sample, we've got about 9,500 spores per cubic meter. Roughly 87% of that are these Basidio spores. Again, this was in November of that year. And so let's take a look at this location first. So the first place we tested was the basement. And when we looked at the basement, what did we see? Remember, first place I looked, total spore count, we had 96 or 9,800 spores per cubic meter outside. We have 146,000 spores per cubic meter inside. Definitely elevated, something going on here in the basement, evidence of water intrusion in the basement. Almost 94% of what we're seeing is Aspergillus penicillium. So yeah, we've definitely got some problematic fungal growth here. 6-figure spore count is a significant amount of spores. Other area we tested. Now, so normally we test the basement and then we test the area above it. We normally see that the basement was wet. That's where the problem is. We go upstairs and we might see an elevated number there, but it's less than what was in the basement. That tells us that if we fix the basement, the numbers in the living space are going to come down. Well, in this particular case, when we tested the living room, wow, we saw almost twice as many total spores per cubic meter upstairs than we did downstairs. That was a little bit of a curveball for us. We looked at that and went, wow, we weren't expecting that. So then we started looking, total spore count, 252,000 spores per cubic meter. Almost all of it is Aspergillus penicillium. We do have a couple other ones. We have the Chaetemonium, which is toxic, as well as the Stachybotrys, which is toxic. So we've got some problematic fungal growth here. Primarily, it's allergenic mold to be, primarily, but it's still these levels, these elevated levels are significantly higher than what we would want to see. We're not recommending a simple surface mold cleanup. We're recommending intensive mold mitigation. Not only that, because the numbers were higher in the living room, and because we're doing our inspection, we're checking things out. What we found out here was when we did our initial inspection, we saw what we saw in the basement. And then when we got these results back, we're like, wow, okay, we need to go back in there. So when we went back in, we actually recommended initially that the client allow us to do an interior thermal imaging scan to see if we saw anything out of the ordinary, but they declined doing that. Well, when we got these results back, they said, you know what, you guys recommended the thermal imaging scan. Can we go ahead and do that? Yeah, good idea. So we went back in, did the thermal imaging scan, and guess what we saw? Well, this particular house was a flip. The people were flipping, the flippers were flipping the house. They knew they had a problem. The day before we got there to do the inspection, they went in with a sealer paint. They went in and sealed and repainted the living room. We could smell the fresh new paint. We knew that it had been freshly painted. We just didn't know why. But when we did the interior thermal imaging scan, we started to see that there were some plumbing leaks in the house. And so they had some pretty significant issues with the plumbing. And it was actually putting, raw sewage and, just wet water and stuff into the wall cavity. So they needed to do intensive mold mitigation here. And we were able to uncover that. Fortunately, we didn't have a buyer that moved into a house that had some significant problems because this particular seller went to great lengths to cover this stuff up. So it happens. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. So guys, that's it. That's how we go about it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take something extremely complex and simplify it as best we can so we have a plan of action to move forward. And that's what we're trying to do, to serve you guys at the highest level we can and to create a fantastic user experience for everybody involved in the transaction. Guys, we're at the end of the class, couple minutes over. It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Happy to answer any questions you have. If you have any other questions, feel free to use us as a resource. And if you guys have any questions about anything at any time, feel free to reach out. Don't think you're being a bother. That's not the case at all. We really want to be available to you guys. Sometimes you guys get into situations where you need an unbiased third-party opinion. We never have to have done a deal with you in the past or ever do a deal with you. We are here as a resource. We would love to be on your list of recommended vendors for your clients. We're striving every day to do better at what we do. We're in the process right now of actually developing our own report writing software because we want to make our reports clearer, simpler. We have very detailed reports, but we're trying to do better at that. And so that's coming down the pike very, very soon. And we're very, very excited about that. I can't wait. Once we get that up and going, we're actually going to be reaching out to you guys to get some feedback on our reports. But Karen's saying she might never eat broccolini again. Not me. I love broccolini. I love broccoli rabe. That's awesome stuff. So, guys, it's been fun. I really, really had fun being with you today. Let's see. Oh, so Charlita says we're doing an inspection for a client tomorrow. Awesome. Glad to hear that. That's fantastic. So with that, Patty, I'm going to ask you to come back on and land this plane and tell everybody how they're going to get their CE credits. I think you've already kind of reviewed that, talking about upcoming classes.
Great. Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you. As always, a great course you're doing. Oh, tomorrow's Stephanie. Oh God, Carlita, she is such a doll. She had me crying on the phone. I was so happy for her that her offer was accepted. We were crying together when I talked to her. Oh God, she's adorable. So happy for her. It's not easy in this market right now to find a house and have your offer accepted. It's really, really a roller coaster ride for the clients. And boy, when it happens, it's very exciting. Anyway, so as I said, everybody will receive an email from me. Hold on to that email. If you don't get it tonight, you will receive it tomorrow. It depends on how quickly I could get the registrations cleaned up. I see some little missing details that I got to go back in and add, and I have to chase a few people down and get some more information from you. So once all that's cleaned up and resolved, I'll submit the file. I'll send you the email. Hold on to the email. It'll contain all of my contact information. If you do not receive your certificate within 48 hours, Anil, I need you to hang in there for 1 second. Did you see the message that I sent to you? Anyway, if you do not receive your certificate within 48 hours, then let me know and I will get it over to you immediately. As soon as I see your email, I'll get it over to you, or as quickly as possible. We do have some great courses coming up. We have Managing the Home Inspection on Thursday from noon to 3. It's a 3-credit course. Preparing your clients, whether they're the seller or the buyer. It's an amazing course, a ton of information. And then next week, so much fun. A bunch of my favorites. Sewer Scope is on Tuesday. If you were not able to register for residential structural inspections, because I'm telling you, that class filled up in like 10 minutes. So if you were not able to attend that last week, I have it back on the schedule on the 14th at 9 a.m. And then, of course, our stucco. If you've not attended our stucco course, I absolutely suggest it. If it's been years since you've attended the stucco course, I think you need a refresher. But other than that, and then I'll send you the link that has my whole April calendar so you can see all the fun things we have coming up. Other than that, have a wonderful day. And now I do need you to hang on here, though. Please don't log off. Okay, you're still on there. Perfect. Love broccoli rabe. Robin's raised her hands. Robin, I'm going to unmute you. You could speak.
Could you send me the link for all of the classes that you were just telling us about? I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to send the full April calendar to everybody on the course.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate
You're so
it.
welcome. Yeah, one of the things I would suggest is if there's courses that you find interesting, just know that they have been filling up pretty quickly. And thank you everybody for all your amazing feedback. Thank you. I think you're real close. Oh, thank you, Sharon. You know, as I always say, if you don't get Pete, you get repeat. The inspectors that are that cover that area are amazing. I mean, there's Dave who's been with us from day one. Dave knows everything that Pete knows, and all of our inspectors are fabulous. All of our inspectors inspect like Pete, analyze like Pete, and report like Pete. So you're golden. But yeah, everybody wants Pete. But I get first dibs. I need him sitting in that seat right there. But certainly, yes, and we do cover all those areas. And the guy that's usually over on that way, the first one would be Dave, and Dave is phenomenal, phenomenal. Okay. Oh, I thought I saw a hand come up. All right, I do need Anil to hang in there. Everybody else, you can log off. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.